Charlie of the Rolling Stones died, and how does the Rolling Stones go on, and all that kind of stuff. But I thought, Jesus, like, you lost your buddy.
Yeah. Well, it's very difficult to lose friends. As you get older, you lose a lot of friends. And not only friends,
When Charlie Watts, the legendary drummer of the Rolling Stones, died in 2021, it shocked fans around the world. What puzzled many people even more was that his famous bandmates, Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, and Ronnie Wood, were not seen at his funeral. This absence sparked rumors and questions that lasted for years. The real reason behind their absence is more complex than anyone could have imagined. The early struggles. To understand this story, we need to go back to the 1980s when Charlie Watts faced some of the darkest moments of his life. Throughout most of his career with the Rolling Stones, Watts had been known as the quiet, steady member of the band. While Mick Jagger and Keith Richards made headlines with their wild rock and roll lifestyle, Watts kept a low profile and seemed to avoid the excesses that often came with fame. However, around 1983, things began to change dramatically for Watts. His usually moderate drinking and occasional drug use escalated into something much more serious and destructive. Unlike many rock stars who used substances to enhance their performance or chase thrills, Watts later explained that his problems came from trying to cope with personal family issues that were weighing heavily on him. Looking back on this difficult period, Watts was honest about what happened to him. He said it felt like he became a completely different person between 1983 and 1986. The transformation was so dramatic that he almost lost his wife Shirley and everything that mattered to him. This was particularly shocking because Watts had always been seen as the moral compass of the Rolling Stones, the one member who stayed grounded while the others lived chaotic lives. Shirley Watts had been by Charlie's side since before the Rolling Stones became famous. She had supported him through all the ups and downs of his career, but during those troubled years in the mid-1980s, even her loyalty was tested to its limits. Charlie later admitted that if he hadn't changed his behavior, he would have lost not just his marriage, but also his sense of who he was as a person. Fortunately, by the late 1980s, Watts managed to get his life back on track. He worked hard to overcome his substance problems and rebuild his relationship with his family. This recovery showed the same quiet determination that had made him such a reliable drummer for the Rolling Stones throughout their career. Health challenges. In the late 1980s, Watts made another important decision for his health. He quit smoking. For someone who had spent decades performing under the intense pressure of touring and recording with one of the world's biggest rock bands, giving up cigarettes was a significant step toward better health. However, even this positive change couldn't protect him from future medical problems. In June 2004, Watts received devastating news. He had been diagnosed with throat cancer. This diagnosis was a shock not only to him and his family, but also to his bandmates and fans around the world. The timing was particularly difficult because the Rolling Stones had been planning new projects and tours. Watts immediately began an intensive course of radiotherapy treatment. For months, he endured the difficult side effects of cancer treatment while fighting to overcome the disease. During this time, his bandmates showed incredible support and patience. Instead of pressuring him to return to work quickly, they waited for him to recover completely. Mick Jagger later recalled telling Watts that they would only start working on their next record when he felt ready. This patience and understanding from his bandmates meant a great deal to Watts during his recovery. True to their word, the Rolling Stones didn't rush him back into the studio or onto the stage until he had fully recovered from his cancer treatment. When Watts finally felt strong enough to return, he joined his bandmates to work on what would become their 2005 album, A Bigger Bang. Remarkably, just after completing his recovery from cancer treatment, he embarked on a demanding 2-year world tour to promote the new album. The tour was physically grueling, involving dozens of concerts around the globe, but Watts handled it with his characteristic professionalism and dedication. Looking back on this experience, Watts made a joke that revealed his dry sense of humor. He said it seemed like whenever the Rolling Stones stopped working, he got sick, so maybe he should just keep playing. This comment showed both his resilience and his commitment to the band that had been such a central part of his life for so many decades. The final years, For the next decade and a half after his cancer recovery, Watts continued to tour and record with the Rolling Stones. Despite being in his 70s and having survived a serious illness, he seemed to defy the effects of aging and continued to provide the steady, reliable drumming that had anchored the band's sound for nearly 60 years. However, by 2021, Watts's health once again became a concern. On August 5th of that year, the Rolling Stones announced some disappointing news to their fans. Watts would not be able to participate in the resumption of their no-filter U.S. tour. He had recently undergone a medical procedure that was widely reported to be heart surgery, and his doctors advised him that he needed time to recover fully before returning to the demanding schedule of touring. This decision marked a very rare absence in Watts's nearly six-decade career with the Rolling Stones. Throughout all those years, he had been remarkably reliable, never missing concerts or letting his bandmates down. To keep the tour going without him, the band called upon Steve Jordan, a longtime Fried and a collaborator, to temporarily take over drumming duties. Steve Jordan was an excellent choice for this difficult task. He had previously worked with Keith Richards in his side project, the Expensive Winos, and was considered one of the few drummers capable of filling Watts's shoes, even if only temporarily. Jordan understood the Rolling Stones' music and had the technical skills and experience needed to handle such a high-profile responsibility. The end of an era. On August 24, 2021, Charlie Watts passed away at the Royal Brompton Hospital in Chelsea, London. He was 80 years old. The cause of his death was squamous cell carcinoma, a type of cancer. True to the dignity and privacy that had defined his entire life, Watts spent his final hours surrounded by his family members. There were no public announcements beforehand, no media circus, just the quiet presence of the people who loved him most, as one of rock music's greatest drummers slipped away peacefully. The news of Watts's death sent shockwaves throughout the music world. Fans, fellow musicians, and music industry professionals all expressed their grief and paid tribute to his incredible contributions to rock music. His surviving Rolling Stones bandmates, Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, and Ronnie Wood, along with former bassist Bill Wyman, all shared heartfelt public tributes. Mick Jagger posted a joyful photograph of Watts laughing, capturing the warmth and humor that his friends knew well. Keith Richards shared a simple but powerful image of a drum kit with a closed sign hanging from it, a wordless message that spoke volumes about the loss the band had suffered. Ronnie Wood spoke about the brotherhood they had shared, while Bill Wyman, who had left the Rolling Stones decades earlier, remembered Watts as a beautiful person. The tributes extended far beyond the Rolling Stones family. Rock legends and musical peers from around the world expressed their grief and admiration. Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr from the Beatles, Elton John, Brian Wilson, Pete Townsend, and many others saluted Watts's artistry and character. To these fellow musicians, Watts wasn't just a great drummer. He was a gentleman of rock music, a rare combination of extraordinary skill, humility, and grace. A digital memorial. The Rolling Stones' official website became a touching digital memorial to their fallen bandmate. For 10 days after his death, every page on the website was replaced with a single black and white photograph of Watts. There were no words, no navigation links, no other content, just his image. It was a powerful, silent tribute that spoke louder than any written statement could have. 2 days after Watts's death, musicians Jason Isbell and Brittany Spencer dedicated a live cover of the Rolling Stones song "Gimme Shelter" to his memory. This gesture showed how far his influence had reached beyond the Rolling Stones' own catalog and how much he meant to musicians across different genres. On August 27th, the Rolling Stones' social media accounts shared a moving video tribute to Watts. The video was a carefully crafted montage of photographs and rare film clips from throughout his career, set to the band's 1974 track, "If You Can't Rock Me." The song choice was particularly meaningful because it opens with the lines about a drummer who thinks he's dynamite. For longtime Rolling Stones fans, this choice perfectly captured both Watts's quiet dynamism behind the drums and the knowing humor that was part of his stage presence. The private farewell. Charlie Watts's funeral was held as a small, private affair in Devon, far from the cameras and crowds that had followed him throughout his career with the Rolling Stones. This intimate ceremony was completely in keeping with his lifelong preference for privacy and his dislike of unnecessary spectacle. Only close family members and a few dear friends were present to say their final goodbyes to the man who had provided the heartbeat for one of rock music's greatest bands. The celebrations of Watts's life and career continued in various forms after his death. In October 2022, an authorized biography was published, offering fans and music historians a deeper look into the man behind the drums. The book provided insights into his personality, his approach to music, and the quiet dignity with which he had lived his extraordinary life. On the first anniversary of his passing, Mick Jagger posted what Rolling Stone magazine described as a deeply moving tribute on social media. The tribute paired archival images of Watts with Jagger's own voiceover and the Rolling Stones song "Till the Next Goodbye," creating an emotional memorial that touched fans around the world. Honoring his legacy. On June 2, 2023, which would have been Watts's 82nd birthday, his family launched official Facebook and Instagram accounts in his memory. In a statement explaining this decision, the family said that Charlie had been too modest to embrace social media during his lifetime, but they hoped that fans would use these platforms to celebrate his enormous musical contributions to rock and roll, blues, and jazz, as well as to remember the wonderful man who had been known and loved by millions of fans around the world. Even in death, Watts's legacy extended beyond his musical achievements. In September 2023, it was announced that his private book collection would go to auction, revealing another side of his cultured personality. Among the treasures in his collection was a signed first edition of The Great Gatsby, which was expected to sell for between $200,000 a piece and $300,000. This valuable item was a testament to his refined personal tastes and his love of literature. In January 2024, another unique chapter in Watts's legacy was revealed when the Bayeux Museum in France announced that it had acquired a life-size replica of the famous Bayeux tapestry from Watts's estate. The museum had purchased this historical reproduction for $16,000. This acquisition was a reminder that Watts had been a quiet connoisseur who collected not only music-related items, but also pieces of history and art. The real reason for their absence. Now we come to the most important part of this story. The real reason why Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, and Ronnie Wood were not present at Charlie Watts's funeral. The answer lies in the complex circumstances surrounding the timing of his death and the commitments the band had made to their fans and their touring crew. At the time of Watts's death in August 2021, the Rolling Stones were in Boston, Massachusetts, completely immersed in final rehearsals for their long-delayed No Filter U.S. tour. This wasn't just a casual run-through of their songs. It was a massive operation involving stage crews, lighting and sound technicians, and months of precise planning and preparation. Every aspect of a Rolling Stones tour is incredibly complex, from pyrotechnics and video projections to the coordination of equipment transportation and venue logistics. All of these elements were locked into a tightly coordinated schedule that had taken months to organize. Canceling or even pausing the tour preparations at that point would have created a domino effect of delays and financial losses that would have impacted hundreds of people who depended on the tour for their livelihoods. The band also felt a deep sense of responsibility to their fans. The No Filter tour had already been postponed once due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and ticket holders had been waiting patiently for over a year to see their shows. Many fans had been holding on to their tickets since 2019, and another delay would have been devastating not only to the Rolling Stones' reputation, but also to the morale of their audience, who had been looking forward to these concerts for so long. Travel restrictions and health concerns. The situation was made even more complicated by the international travel restrictions that were still in place in August 2021 due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Flights from the United States to the United Kingdom came with strict quarantine requirements that would have made it nearly impossible for the band members to attend the funeral and return in time for their tour commitments. Anyone arriving in Britain at that time faced mandatory isolation periods, and upon returning to the United States, there were similar quarantine rules in place. For Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, or Ronnie Wood to fly to Devon for Watts's funeral would have meant spending weeks in quarantine on both ends of the journey. This was time they simply didn't have if they wanted to honor their commitments to their fans and their touring crew. The risk was enormous. The entire tour could have been canceled before it even began if key band members were stuck in quarantine. This would have resulted in millions of dollars in losses and would have disappointed hundreds of thousands of fans who had been waiting years to see the Rolling Stones perform live. Health and safety considerations were also at the forefront of their decision-making process. The Delta variant of COVID-19 was spreading rapidly at that time, and any unnecessary exposure to the virus, particularly in crowded travel settings or at gatherings, could have infected key members of the band or crew. The Rolling Stones had worked very hard to maintain a protective bubble around their touring party to keep everyone safe and healthy. Breaking that protective bubble, even for something as important and meaningful as Charlie's funeral, risked derailing the entire tour and endangering the well-being of everyone involved in the production, respecting Charlie's values. Beyond all the practical and logistical considerations, there was another important factor that influenced the band's decision, one that was rooted in who Charlie Watts was as a person. Throughout his life, Watts had consistently valued privacy and had always disliked unnecessary spectacle or publicity. His funeral in Devon perfectly reflected these deeply held values. It was small, low-key, and attended only by close family members and a few close friends. Those who knew Watts best said that this intimate, private ceremony was exactly the kind of farewell he would have wanted for himself. Former Rolling Stones tour manager Sam Cutler, who had worked closely with the band for many years, put it very simply: Charlie would have hated a fuss. The surviving band members understood and respected this sentiment, recognizing that turning his funeral into a high-profile event with media attention and celebrity attendees would have gone completely against Charlie's nature and wishes. Meaningful tributes. Although they couldn't be present at his funeral, the Rolling Stones found many meaningful ways to honor their fallen bandmate during their tour. Every single night of the No Filter tour, they opened their show with a moving tribute video featuring Charlie behind his drum kit. The large screens filled with carefully selected archival footage that captured his elegance, precision, and the quiet intensity he brought to every performance. The band also altered their legendary tongue and lips logo to black and white as a subtle but powerful symbol of mourning. This visual tribute appeared on merchandise, stage backdrops, and promotional materials throughout the tour. Every performance during the tour was dedicated to Charlie's memory, with Mick Jagger often taking time during the shows to address the crowd and speak about their friendship, and Charlie's contributions to the band. The tributes extended beyond the stage performances as well. Keith Richards' social media post of Charlie's drum kit with a simple closed sign hanging over it became an iconic image that perfectly captured the sense of loss felt by the band and their fans. Mick Jagger's photograph of Watts smiling warmly served as a reminder to fans around the world of the quiet joy and positive spirit that Charlie had brought to the Rolling Stones for nearly 60 years. These gestures were not grand or overly theatrical. Instead, they were perfectly in keeping with Charlie's understated style and personality, ensuring that the farewell tributes resonated with millions of fans around the world while honoring the man's preference for dignity over spectacle. Charlie's journey with the band. To fully appreciate Charlie Watts' importance to the Rolling Stones, it's worth looking back at how he first became involved with the band. In mid-1962, Charlie Watts was already an established and respected drummer in London's jazz scene. He was a familiar face in the city's club circuit, particularly in venues that showcased the growing British fascination with American rhythm and blues music. It was in this musical environment that Watts first encountered Brian Jones, Ian "Stu" Stewart, Mick Jagger, and Keith Richards, all of whom were also regular participants in London's rhythm and blues club scene. While there was immediate musical chemistry between Watts and the other musicians, he didn't join their fledgling band right away. In the early 1960s, Watts was already earning a steady income from his drumming gigs, which was a luxury for any working musician at that time. The group that would become the Rolling Stones was still playing small venues, often for very little or no pay at all, and convincing Watts to give up his financial security for an unproven band was no easy task. It wasn't until January 1963 that Watts finally agreed to join the Rolling Stones as their permanent drummer. His decision marked a crucial turning point for the group, solidifying a lineup that would go on to dominate the music world for decades. His first public performance as a permanent member of the Rolling Stones took place on February 2, 1963, at the Ealing Jazz Club, a venue that had become an important hub for the British rhythm and blues movement. From that moment forward, Watts's steady, unflashy drumming became the foundation of the Rolling Stones' sound. Over the years, Mick Jagger would affectionately introduce him on stage as the Wembley Whammer, a playful reference to both his London roots and his powerful, precise style behind the drum kit. Beyond the drums, Charlie Watts was far more than just the Rolling Stones drummer. He was also a talented visual artist who contributed his creative skills to the band's image and stage presentations. In the early days of the Rolling Stones, Watts created graphic art and comic strips that were included with the group's releases, including artwork for the album sleeve of Between the Buttons. One of Watts's most memorable contributions to the Rolling Stones' publicity came in 1975 when he masterminded one of the band's most famous promotional stunts. Instead of holding a traditional press conference to announce their upcoming tour, the Rolling Stones shocked everyone by rolling down Fifth Avenue in New York City on the back of a flatbed truck while playing Brown Sugar in the middle of Manhattan traffic. This spectacular publicity stunt was entirely Charlie's idea, inspired by the way traditional New Orleans jazz bands would promote their shows with street performances. The event created enormous buzz and media coverage, establishing a template for creative tour announcements that many other bands would later copy. Watts's artistic influence also extended to the design of the Rolling Stones' elaborate touring stages. Working closely with Mick Jagger, he helped conceptualize and execute some of the most ambitious stage designs in rock history. His contributions began with the innovative lotus-shaped stage for the 1975 Tour of the Americas, and continued through later productions such as the Steel Wheels Urban Jungle Tour, the Bridges to Babylon Tour, the Licks Tour, and the A Bigger Bang Tour. Each of these stage designs was a massive technical achievement that blended music with theatrical spectacle in ways that inspired future generations of live performers. Unmatched reliability. Throughout his decades with the Rolling Stones, Charlie Watts's professional discipline was truly legendary. Over his entire career with the band, he never missed a single concert, a record that spoke volumes about his reliability, dedication, and professionalism. This perfect attendance record was particularly remarkable given the physical demands of touring and the unpredictable nature of the rock and roll lifestyle. Watts's final live performance with the Rolling Stones took place on August 30, 2019, at Hard Rock Stadium in Miami, Florida. This concert closed out the No Filter Tour before the COVID-19 pandemic brought live music performances to a halt around the world. It was a fitting end to an extraordinary live performance career that had spanned nearly 60 years. Alongside Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, Charlie Watts was one of only 3 members to appear on every album in the Rolling Stones' extensive discography. This consistency further cemented his status as an irreplaceable part of the band's core identity and creative process. Charlie's drumming style was never flashy or attention-seeking, but it was precise, economical, and perfectly suited to serve the songs. Many music critics and fellow musicians credited this quality as the secret to the Rolling Stones' enduring groove and rhythmic power. His approach to drumming emphasized the importance of the song over individual showmanship, a philosophy that helped create the solid foundation upon which the band's legendary sound was built. Even after his death in 2021, Charlie Watts's musical presence continued to be felt in the Rolling Stones' work. In October 2023, the band released Hackney Diamonds, their first studio album in 18 years. Among the tracks on this album were 2 songs, Mess It Up and Live by the Sword, that featured Charlie Watts on drums. These recordings had been completed before his passing and served as a bittersweet reminder of his timeless musical touch and his permanent role in shaping the sound of one of the greatest rock bands of all time. A private life well lived. While Charlie Watts spent most of his adult life in the spotlight as a member of one of the world's most famous rock bands, he managed to maintain a remarkably private and stable personal life. On October 14, 1964, he married Shirley Ann Shepherd, a woman who had captured his heart even before he joined the Rolling Stones. Their relationship had begun before the band's meteoric rise to fame, and Shirley remained a steady, supportive presence throughout all the whirlwind years that followed. Unlike many of his rock star contemporaries, whose relationships were often tumultuous and heavily publicized in the media, Watts maintained a deeply committed private marriage that lasted for 57 years. This was a remarkable achievement in any era, but particularly notable given the pressures and temptations that came with international fame and the rock and roll lifestyle. Charlie and Shirley had one daughter, Serafina, who was born in March 1968. Serafina later gave Charlie his only grandchild, a girl named Charlotte. Watts cherished his family relationships and consistently valued the privacy of his domestic life above all else. While the media and fans often focused on the glamour and excesses of his more famous bandmates, Watts kept his personal life firmly out of the spotlight, reinforcing his reputation as a reserved, thoughtful person who preferred the quiet pleasures of home and family over celebrity attention and public recognition. The Watts family home, Halsden House, was located near Dolton, a peaceful rural village in North Devon. This property was much more than just a residence. It was a reflection of Charlie's deep love for nature and animals. At Halsden House, he operated an Arabian horse stud farm, a passion that provided him with both personal satisfaction and creative fulfillment that was completely separate from his musical career. The stud farm allowed Watts to immerse himself completely in the care and breeding of horses, an interest that was as far removed from the frenetic world of rock music as possible. Friends and colleagues who visited him there often remarked that this aspect of his life revealed a side of Charlie that was rarely seen by the public: meticulous, patient, deeply knowledgeable about his horses, and quietly joyful in his work with these magnificent animals. A man of many interests, despite his success with the Rolling Stones, Charlie Watts never learned to drive and never obtained a driver's license. However, this didn't stop him from developing a deep appreciation for automobiles. He preferred to admire cars as works of art and engineering, appreciating their design, craftsmanship, and beauty rather than viewing them simply as means of transportation. This approach was typical of Watts's unique perspective on life. He could find artistic value and beauty in many different things. Charlie also maintained a lifelong passion for cricket, a sport that is deeply embedded in British culture and tradition. He collected cricket memorabilia with the same careful attention to detail that he applied to his drumming and stage design work. For Watts, cricket was not merely a casual hobby, but a serious interest that connected him to a quieter, more traditional aspect of British life. His extensive collection included signed cricket bats, vintage photographs, programs from historic matches, and other artifacts that demonstrated his deep respect for the history and artistry of the game. Through all of these diverse pursuits, his family life, his horse breeding, his love of cricket, and his appreciation for art and literature, Charlie Watts created a life that perfectly balanced the extremes of international fame with the serenity of personal fulfillment. While the Rolling Stones performed in stadiums filled with tens of thousands of screaming fans, Watts could always retreat to his North Devon estate, where he was surrounded by the peaceful rhythms of rural life and the quiet loyalty of his family. This duality defined Charlie Watts's entire existence: the public persona of a legendary rock drummer who had helped create some of the most iconic music in history, and the private man who was devoted to his home, his heritage, and the CEI's enduring pleasures that gave his life meaning beyond the stage. In both roles, he demonstrated the same qualities that made him such an exceptional musician: consistency, dignity, and an unwavering commitment to doing things the right way, regardless of what others might expect or demand. Charlie Watts lived his life on his own terms, and even in death, he was honored in the way he would have chosen: quietly, privately, and with the deep respect of those who knew him best. The Rolling Stones' absence from his funeral was not a sign of disrespect or lack of caring, but rather a final tribute to a man who had always valued substance over spectacle, and who had spent a lifetime proving that true greatness doesn't always need to make the most noise.